Greetings. My name is Raj Echambadi. I am the Dunton Family Dean at the Damore McKim School of Business. It is a great honor for me to welcome Dr. Prahlad Singh here. Prahlad is the President and Chief Executive Officer of PerkinElmer. And after having joined PerkinElmer in 2014 as the Group President of their Diagnostics Division. Prior to PerkinElmer, Prahlad has had an illustrious career in a variety of corporate institutions, including General Electric, Bristol Myers Squibb, and DuPont. Prior to that, Prahlad finished his PhD in chemistry from the University of Missouri, Columbia, and of course, a master's in business administration from Northeastern. An incredible career traversing both between academic and corporate domains. We are honored to welcome Prahlad. Prahlad, welcome to the Lessons in Leadership series. Thank you for this opportunity to talk to you.
Thank you, Raj. It's a pleasure to be here.
Thank you. So I wanted to start off with your formative influences. You grew up in India, and so I wanted to get a sense of what was growing up in India like. What prompted you to go into to science education in India? So let's start off with your formative influences.
Sure. I mean, growing up in India, especially in the 70s and 80s, it's always, an academic fervor.
Yeah.
My mother used to run a restaurant, and all the three of us siblings would work with her, and she was a path breaker at that time to be able to be a businesswoman. And she always sort of had instilled a sense of discipline and determination and entrepreneurship earlier on in our formative years to sort of succeed. Now, as you probably know quite well, that growing up in India, you either, sort of had the ambition of being in the medical profession or in the engineering profession.
Right.
And if neither one of those work out, you sort of look for what alternative career options are there. Science always, I had always had an inclination towards science, but I also sort of had a sense of wanting to do something on the government side initially. And I sort of went through the various examinations, public examinations that most Indians growing up as kids do take at some point of time. And I started my initial career as a customs officer, customs and excise officer.
Wow.
And while I was doing that, oncology and cancer played a big role in our family early on. So I had this fascination about what we could do around oncology and cancer, and then study more about it. And at that time, my plans sort of shifted towards more of an academic career and pursuing post-graduation studies. So I applied to the University of Missouri, Columbia, which not many know has the largest research reactor in the world, and had access to medical radioisotopes. And then in the late 80s, early 90s. There was a lot of research going on of tagging radionucleotides to monoclonal antibodies and use them as targeted radiotherapeutics. And they had a very strong program there. And that's why my inclination towards University of Missouri. So fast forward, I came to University of Missouri for my graduate studies.
Very nice. So, if you ever write a book, Prahlad, I have a book title for you, From Mumbai to Missouri, the journey. But let me ask you this. By all accounts, when I look at your career at Missouri, you were a very successful student. I read somewhere that you had publications and patents, and they did offer a tenure track job for you. But So obviously you were there for a while and then you switched into a corporate career. Was that switch difficult for you? Because obviously you would have been a star in the academic profession. You seem to have loved what you did. You were passionate about what you did, and obviously you had a talent for what you did, etc. So, what prompted this move to the corporate side? And if you also could talk a little bit about your academic background, that would be phenomenal.
Sure. No, I mean, Mizzou was a great place for fostering innovation and for research, and I really liked the environment there and the opportunity to sort of grow there. And yeah, I was lucky enough to have great advisors early on in my career at
Right.
Missouri. And I got my PhD in under 4 years with several publications and patents, and it was very successful. In fact, Missouri sort of applied for my permanent residency to the U.S. under the Eminent Scientist Program that was prevalent at that time, and were very supportive. Again, the influence of women is a common theme in my career. I talked about my mom earlier on, and I met my wife at Missouri, and she actually got a NIH fellowship at MIT post her graduation, post her PhD.
Mm.
So she moved there, and and sort of that was also both a personal and professional decision to move to the New England area at that time. And one of my advisors at Missouri actually moved to the industry in the Boston area at that time with DuPont, and I sort of moved there, and that's how my entry into the industry side of my career.
Got it. So you started off with DuPont as a postdoc, correct? And then you went on into bigger and better responsibilities over time. One of the things that struck me about your career, Prahlad, and probably we'll take a deeper dive later, is you've done a lot of things. You have been with M&A, you've been with business development, you've been with emerging markets, you have managed for GE, women's health vertical, etc. Nobody could have pigeonholed you into one particular thing. There is no linearity in your career, if you will. So I want to start off with asking you about your emerging markets role at DuPont, because I'm not sure many people would have, considered that particular option, especially a couple of decades ago, etc. But you took I would say, a calculated and prepared risk, both because of your intrinsic capabilities and what you saw. So could you talk a little bit about these two things? One, very specifically about your emerging market experience, and very broadly about your career arc, your ability to traverse multiple domains.
Yeah, let me address the second part, the second part of your question first, because that's actually it has a linkage to your first part, to the first question of yours.
Yeah.
I think in our careers, and as we look at the new generation of leaders emerging, whether it's in our own company or whoever I work with, that I advise from my lessons learned, is that be willing to take calculated risks in your career. And if that means that if you like something that you see that you think will interest you, be willing to make a lateral move, or be willing to make even a downward move. And I think the earlier you take these risks, the better off you are in the longer term. So again, the motto of fail early but fail often, it really resonates with me. So sort of that was what was the angle, when I moved from Missouri to DuPont at that point of time, to an industrial postdoc position. It was at best a lateral, if not a downward move from a career perspective, but it opened up a world of opportunities for me. Again, when I started there, the leader of the manufacturing segment at DuPont was a leader named Jean Krieger, and she was a very strong supporter and mentor earlier on in my career. And she was willing to take me from R&D into operations. And when I was in operations, there was a lot of opportunities. At that time in the early 80s, some business segments tended to think global, but was still acting local.
Right.
And then I think I was willing to take the risk and raise my hand and say, hey, you know what? I'm familiar with the geography, I'm familiar with the region, and I'm willing to put in the time and effort and investment to travel and learn more. And consequently, the company also was willing to invest in me doing that, right? So you find the right match, and that's when I started going as a technical expert into the emerging market. And once that happened, it opened up a whole new door of opportunities wherein the region said, hey, this guy knows the business, he knows what he's talking about. Maybe, we should give an opportunity for him to learn more on the business side of it because we could use some skills there. So sort of that's where you try and keep, one leg in each boat and balance it out till a point where you say, okay, now I'm going to make the switch. And that's how I moved into the emerging markets. And I started with a small region. And by the end of it, for the business segment that I was working for, I was managing, most of Middle East, Africa, and Asia.
Like you said, I want to dive into one point you said, Prahlad. Most people about a couple of decades ago, and as you rightly pointed out, it was actually a global business that was localized reasonably. That's how people looked at all these emerging markets, etc. So when you went in and you were obviously very successful, you managed a larger region, etc. So as you advise people as they are going into these emerging markets and growth markets, what would your advice be?
Obviously the world is very different today than it was 20 years ago. But I think the fundamental principles still remain the same, right? It's not about gaining domain expertise, whether it's in a region or whether it's on the technology side or on the business side. But having intrinsic and deep domain knowledge is important. And I think that's where you have to put in the hours, you have to put in the hard work, you have to get really uncomfortable knowing what you need to know, right? Skimming the surface works for a little bit. But after a point, diving deep and learning more, whether it's about a region or whether it's about a technology or whether it's about a function on each of them,
right?
The time investment is what you can put in. And then I think that pays off in the long run.
Right. And one last thing here before we move on to other things. Trust is obviously a major thing. Trust is an operational currency, especially when you are dealing with moving from the Western world to the emerging markets and to the Eastern world, etc. So how did you engender trust with your partners?
It's very interesting thought process if you think through it. Whether it's on me individually with my leaders at that point of time, or now when I sit back and I'm looking at talent and I'm looking at leaders, right? The skill set for a role is baseline. When you are entering into a role, you assume that you have a baseline level of skill set, whatever the work is. I think the layers that make you more competitive are integrity, trust, transparency. These are the virtues. These are not virtues or skills. These are virtues. These are not skill sets that you can teach an individual. And I think that's what has
played
a role and still plays a role.
Very nice. Thank you. So this is the time, I think, when you decide to also, apart from your busy professional responsibilities, you decide to do an MBA from Northeastern. We are very grateful to you, given the fact that you had many educational choices and you chose Northeastern as your educational destination. But I wanted to ask you, why an MBA? You were already on the business side. You were a rising star. So what prompted you, given your work responsibilities, etc.? And I know you were traveling like crazy at that point, to do an MBA.
Yeah, I think what I realized at that point in time is that, while I had, enough domain knowledge on the technology side, and I was only skimming the surface on the business side. And whether it's around strategy, whether it's around P&L, a balance sheet, a business case, strategic prioritization, these are skill sets these are skill sets I needed to acquire. I needed to know enough to be dangerous, is the term I keep using. I didn't need to be an expert in putting a business model together or a full blown out strategic plan, but I needed to know enough to understand what's good and what's not. And I think Northeastern was the best place because the way the program at that point in time was designed was to allow leaders like us to come in and gain enough knowledge. And I would say that it was a 2 years very well spent.
Right. And also one of the things that in our personal conversations, when I hear about what you had, what your responsibilities were, and your travel obligations were, and for you to do that also was discipline and persistence of the highest order. Could you talk a little bit about, the kind of travel you were engaged in, and you were simultaneously studying for an MBA. Could you give our viewers an inkling, a sense of the depth of your or the intensity of your work at that point?
Sure. I mean, it's a funny story. At that point, because I was doing the program, I decided not to move my family there. So we were located in the Boston area. So, but my region was, all on the other side of the globe. So I would travel from, Boston to LA to Auckland to Sydney to Seoul to Singapore to Bombay to Dubai to Cairo, back to Boston. I would land at the airport and I would get straight to class. And it was in the Needham campuses where we used to have class. And these were 3 or 4 hour classes, right? And, Professor Meyer in particular was very keen on class participation as an example.
Right.
So I would ask my questions at the 20-minute point, 1 hour point, 2 hour point, and and engage in great discussions. It was also, for me, fortuitously, I had some very good colleagues and friends who we all decided to do it at the same point in time. So the invigoration that comes through from learning, was enough fuel to get, keep me going. And then I was fortunate enough to have very good teachers. Some of them are still teaching at Northeastern.
Yes, and so then you move on to bigger and better responsibilities. I specifically wanted to talk a little bit about your M&A experience, Prahlad, mergers and acquisitions experience. Because in our conversations, one of the things that I found fascinating is how you look at acquisitions. Obviously there is a culture point of view, but also from a capability point of view, what should our strategy be in terms of mergers and acquisitions? So could you elaborate for us how you look at your acquisition strategy?
Yeah, I mean, from an M&A perspective, as you think about businesses, the intent really is what is going to gain traction or what is going to be the growth trajectory for a particular business 3-5 years from now, not today. Obviously, if you are building scale, then you're going to look for something here and now. But generally, what we tend to do is look for gaps in your portfolio, right? What can you fill organically, and what you can't fill organically, you go and look for inorganic acquisitions. And I think, one of the important aspects is to not just find the cultural fit, but also figure out how you look for acquisition opportunities where you are able to integrate the company into the mothership, at the same time maintain the entrepreneurial culture, maintain the innovation engine, which was the reason for which you acquired the company. And it is very different if you acquire a company in China versus India versus Germany or the US. And that is really intriguing and exciting for us. And I think it's a great part of our DNA today.
Got it. And one specific thing I wanted to talk to you about is I know that you are big on technology synergies as opposed to cost synergies. Could you talk a little bit about why you look at it that way and your perspective on the so-called technology versus cost synergies?
The whole intent and idea when you are going to acquire a company, if the focus is on growth, then the focus should be on commercial and technology synergies, because what you're trying to do is find something else that acts as a fuel to your growth engine. And the other aspect is that, if you're acquiring a company, if you come in with a cost first mindset, you're going to lose the top talent. You're going to lose the fabric which had made that company successful in the first place.
Got it.
So our focus has always been on looking at companies where we go in and invest, rather than look at it from a cost synergy, rationalization, restructuring mindset. And that has worked very well for us so far. In fact, to give you an example, most of the companies that we have acquired over the past, I would say 5 to 7 years, most of the founders or senior leaders of those companies have stayed on and expanded their roles in PerkinElmer today. And this is something we are really proud of.
Fantastic. So let me ask you one question. As I looked at your background, you eloquently talked about the influence of your mother, your wife, and then, of course, a leader at Missouri Columbia who you followed from Mizzou to Boston, if you will, etc. And on a parallel track at GE, you managed and oversaw the women's health vertical. Could you tell us a little bit about how that came about? Because you made it extraordinarily successful. Did people not look at it the way you looked at it before? What was your role? How did you enable that vertical to reach preeminence in your leadership?
Yeah, GE is probably the most fertile ground for leadership development in the world, and it continues to be so. I think from the opportunity that it opened up was, again, the acceptance that the way businesses are generally, large businesses are segmented is they are in their own verticals.
Right.
But as as businesses evolve and as technology evolves, and more importantly, as medicine evolves, one of the things that becomes very transparent is you sort of have to have a care cycle around the disease area.
Right.
Whether it's around oncology, around women's health, or I know what we call around from cradle to birth. Now,
right.
For our newborn screening business or reproductive health sciences. The opportunity was there in GE for women's health. There was a very strong mammography business, there was a strong bone densitometry business, and there was, a strong OBGYN business around ultrasound. But it wasn't connected, and that's where, the opportunity opened up for me to go to the leadership and say, this is a great opportunity to create a women's health business where you could bring all of these resources together under one umbrella and sort of build a care cycle around the disease. And and that was the initial foray within GE Healthcare to start building disease area based care cycles, and it has fostered on now beyond women's health to oncology and cardiac and other disease areas too, and that worked very well.
Very nice, fantastic. So now going to PerkinElmer, you start off in the diagnostic business. Now you are the president and CEO. I wanted to ask you your perspective. By the way, I wanted to ask you about serendipity in business, the role of leaders in enabling and empowering individuals. You told me last year about a story of how you got into the COVID business. Could you talk a little bit about that, and what should leaders be looking at in terms of fostering such opportunities?
You know, PerkinElmer has a very strong portfolio around life sciences, diagnostics, food, and analytical life sciences. When COVID came about at the end of 2019 and early 2020, as we all know, it's sort of the first origins of this was in China. And we have a very strong team in China. We have more than 3,000 people there now, with a very strong R&D and manufacturing capability. But some of our own scientists were personally affected by this. During the New Year holiday, for example, the Chinese New Year holiday, one of our preeminent molecular diagnostic scientists, her parents lived in Wuhan, and she headed to the airport when she found out that that Wuhan was shut down. And she came back to the office, and over a period of 7 to 10 days, she developed an assay for COVID-19, which is ranked #1 in terms of sensitivity by the FDA on their website. So it's something that we are really proud of. But that's the kind of ingenuity and innovation that you have to build in the DNA of the company. And this doesn't happen overnight.
Right.
The ability to be able to provide them the freedom to try and fail early, but fail often.
Right.
And that's a very good example of how this has come about. I'll give you another example, right? Our most sensitive diagnostic kit for PCR testing for COVID-19 comes from China, and the most sensitive antigen-based lateral flow test for testing of COVID-19 comes from India, our India business. So it's again a reflection of how, as Professor Amurthy keeps talking about, the reverse innovation.
Reverse innovation.
And we've got two very good examples of how we have implemented that in our business.
Right. And for the benefit of the viewers, I want to qualify what you meant by reverse innovation. Reverse innovation is when you go into an emerging market and growth market, and there are these customized solutions for that market, and then you bring it back, hopefully into your Western world, into the mainstream market later on. But the fundamental fact is you learn from the emerging markets. You go in with humility, and you understand that there are capabilities that can be transferred and so on. So thank you. I wanted to go back to one more thing, Prahlad. As you were talking about the COVID-19 assay, as a leader, you have a dilemma here. You have a roadmap, you have a strategy, and you know what your products are going to be, etc. And then serendipity strikes, and then there are these opportunities that come in organically through either your employees or through other mechanisms, etc. So how do you as a leader figure out, because there are going to be tens of opportunities that you're going to see this way, what I would call as random serendipitous opportunities, etc. So how do you know which one to focus on? How does it fit into your broader portfolio? How do you traverse that domain?
Great question, Raj. And I don't think the answer is a simple black and white one. And it's also not all gut, right? It generally is a combination of a business sense and at the same time trying to figure out what's the right thing to do. Let me give you sort of relate that to specific examples. I think it all comes down to your leaders and your team. And this is where sort of having a team that has the skill set and not just the expertise, but also the trust and integrity that you want to develop in your leaders. One thing that related to this is what we did early on. We sort of went out to our organization of 14,000 employees globally. And this was around the March timeframe where we said, we've got this big, life-changing event happening globally to all of us. We are all locked in our houses. But the one thing I can assure you as a leader, and we can assure you as a company, is that we are not going to do any layoffs.
Got it.
And sort of take out that cloud from our employees, mindset that, am I going to lose my job? And just being black and white and communicating often was becoming very relevant and very important. And then what it did, it sort of opened up. It's like, it became an innovations Pandora box.
Right.
People in the factories were themselves defining ways of how they delineate one floor from the other. So in
Right.
fact, somebody was infected on one floor and we had to shut down one floor. The other floors would work. Our head of operations calls it supply chain redundancy. We built so much redundancy in our supply chain that we were manufacturing the same product in 3 continents during the COVID phase.
Right.
That's not in an easy feat. But idea really is that the market tells you what your customers tell you what they want.
Got it.
But being agile and nimble enough is what's important, relevant. We often call ourselves a $4 billion startup.
Got it.
And that mindset is very important. But it is organized chaos. There is chaos.
Yeah. Yeah.
But the challenge is, how do you manage it in a manner that it is organized?
Got it. Now that's fascinating. And also, one thing I want our viewers to take away from this is the fact that you lead by values. There are certain values inside your head: customer centricity, employee centricity. And as long as those values are satisfied, then the opportunity passes your smell test. So that's another way to think about this. So now let me ask you, what is next for your entire industry? Because you and I have talked about gene and cell therapy, and in fact, in our earlier conversation, you said it makes you tick. So what is next for you? What is next for the industry? What is next for PerkinElmer?
I mean, if you look at what COVID-19 has told us, is that the fabric of innovation, is well and alive across the industry, right? And unfortunately, it required an impetus like COVID-19 to sort of, accelerate it in a manner that you could get drugs and diagnostics approved in such a fast way. mRNA therapies and vaccines that you are seeing are a very good example of how innovation thrives.
Right.
But I think what it also did is it opened up the door for a much more innovation to happen in the cell and gene therapy arena. And while we are not in cell and gene therapeutics, what we do thrive in is providing researchers the tools, the devices, the assays, the reagents, and the software platform they need to develop and do research and discovery on the new generation of drugs around cells and genes. Because I think, single cell analysis, single cell storage, CRISPR, gene editing, I mean, you hear all of this, but this is here and now. And the way we look at the market is that, even though therapeutics approval will take time, the investment in research in these arenas is going to grow, by an order of magnitude over the next decade. And we want to be there for our customers and for researchers to be able to provide them with flexible but validated workflows, so they are able to pick and choose what they want, and at the same time be productive in the work they do.
Got it. Fantastic. So I want to switch gears and talk to you about the advice that you would give for young professionals. You've acknowledged the role of mentorship in your life. And I know you mentor a lot of young professionals. To our students who are now going to embark on a professional career, what would your advice be, Prahlad?
I can share my examples, and I can share with I try to embark even upon my own kids, who are just moving into that phase of their lives where they are graduating and looking for opportunities and just settling in their first jobs post education. It is be willing to take risks. Be willing to take calculated risks early on in your career. Don't visualize that you will have a set boundary, around which is sort of wrapped up in a box and comes to you. Here's your job description, here's what you need to do. I think that's the piece. If you are willing to be, willing to be adventurous on, the more you will benefit. And the earlier you do this in your career, the more the return on that investment is later on. And I'm a living example of that, right? I was willing to take risks earlier on in my career to learn different verticals, functions, regions, technology in the business. And I didn't succeed in all my roles, just to be clear, right? I was not a resounding success in all my career options, but I was willing to go and learn. And I think that's one thing that I would encourage all the listeners to keep in mind.
Thank you. And you've also talked a lot about failure in this conversation. Just now you said you were not a resounding success in all that you tried. And what would your specific advice be about, and in fact, you use the term fail early, but fail often. Don't hesitate to be failing, if you will. As people are embarking on their professional careers, etc., they want perfection. And what you are giving them, this piece of advice probably jars them. So what would your advice be about failure and incorporating failure as a part of your learning process?
Well, let me give you a specific example, Raj, right? Generally, what happens is that, you are looking for a particular career goal, right, that you want to embark upon. But my suggestion and my advice is that look not for a career goal, but look for what you would love to do. Because if you, again, this is it sounds cliche, but if you chase results, then it becomes tougher. But if you chase loving what you want to do, then results follow. And I think this is where there is a dichotomy, right, in the younger generation. And, again, is that you want, as you pointed out, right, they are chasing perfection. And sometimes perfection comes by sacrificing something that you really are, passionate about. And what I chose earlier on in my career is that if I wasn't passionate about something, then even if I was great at it, I would move on to something else. And eventually I found my calling in business, which was a combination of all pieces. And that's where I feel really most comfortable and regenerated on a daily basis. So I would just, encourage all listeners is pursue the passion that really gets you going, something that ticks you. As I said, what ticks me nowadays is cell and gene therapy.
Right.
Find your cell and gene therapy.
Got it. Now, this is fabulous advice, Prahlad. Also eminently implementable in people's life. Find something you're passionate about, invest your efforts into becoming talented in that domain, and then results will follow. Be focused on the process, if you will. And that's fantastic. So I want to end this delightful conversation, Prahlad. I could do this for hours, is a little bit talking about the community. For example, I can tell that you are very highly engaged with us, with the Center for Emerging Markets, with the McKim, etc. And obviously, you give tremendously of your time, talent, and treasure to a variety of things that are important to you and significant to you in your life. So I wanted to get your advice to, again, our viewers on ways you engage. Why is it important for you? And what would your advice be for our viewers to be community minded?
I think one of the things that, I learned from one of my mentors, he said, what she said was, look, you will always reach a point in your life where you will be able to, donate to charities, where you will be able to, give money or funding and to that extent. But the thing that's most precious to all of us is our time.
Correct.
And I think the more you invest your time in doing good and being a champion for good is what is the most rewarding thing to you as an individual. It is really the most rewarding part of my career right now. Whether it's with Mass General, with what's going on, with the second wave that went on in COVID and
Right.
and what we as a community, as a company, and as individuals are doing is by giving not just what we can afford from a financial perspective, but more importantly from our time. And I think because you have learned from your experiences and you want to bring that to bear. And what I would encourage the viewers again and to the listeners is that give your time. Give your time to your community, give your time to people who need your help. And then I think that will pay, there is a very good return on that investment that you will make.
Perfect. Thank you. Thank you, Prahlad. That was a fantastic way to close this conversation. Thank you again for not only giving us the time today to share your insights, but also thank you for being such a wonderful ambassador and evangelist for Damore McKim and Northeastern. We greatly appreciate it. And I look forward to seeing what is ahead for Prahlad, what is ahead for PerkinElmer. Best wishes in all your endeavors, Prahlad. Thank you so much for this time.
Thank you, Raj. I really appreciate the time and best wishes to you too.
Thank you.
Take care.